Robert Caldwell was about to sell a little girl for $200. That's the thought that kept hammering in his head, a nail being driven into a coffin. His hands were shaking, not from the cool morning air, but from the rot deep inside him. He was brushing his old donkey, Buttercup, but his eyes were fixed on the dusty road that led to town. Any minute now, a man named Alex Vickers was going to ride up, hand him a pouch of coins, and Robert was supposed to give him something that wasn't his to give. He was supposed to give him Zara. 6-year-old Zara sat on the porch steps, her tiny hands clutching a doll made from old rags. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even scared. She just watched him with those big brown eyes, the same eyes her mother had. "He's not coming today," she whispered, a little prayer against the inevitable. Robert wished he could believe her, but Alex Vickers was always on time. He was a businessman after all, a man who bought and sold things. And today, the thing he was buying was a child. The weirdest part of the whole morning was Buttercup. For 20 years, the donkey had been a creature of habit. Pasture in the morning, barn in the evening. But today, he'd planted himself right in the middle of the yard, a stubborn gray wall between the house and the gate. When Robert had tried to lead him away, the old donkey had just dug his hooves in and refused to move. It was like he knew, like he could smell the bad deal coming down the road. Robert pulled out his pocket watch. 2 hours. 2 hours until he betrayed the promise he'd made to a dying woman. "I'll take care of her, Martha. She'll never want for anything." What a joke that turned out to be. The letter from Henderson, the man he owed money to, felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. 3 days overdue. Payment in full or else. And Henderson's or else was never something you wanted to find out about. He had $14 to his name. The roof leaked, the fence was rotting, and Zara needed new shoes. Henderson's offer had seemed like a lifeline. He said a man, Alex Vickers, needed help on his ranch. Said Zara would be fed, housed, treated well. Just temporary, he'd said, a way to work off the debt. But the more Robert thought about it, the more the story unraveled. Why pay so much for a 6-year-old? Why her specifically? The questions had no good answers, and the silence where those answers should be was terrifying. Buttercup let out a low snort and shuffled forward, blocking the main gate completely now. His ears swiveled, listening to something Robert couldn't yet hear. "What is it, boy?" Robert murmured, trying to calm his own racing heart. And then he heard it, the faint, rhythmic crunch of wagon wheels on the dirt road. A knot of ice formed in his stomach. But something was wrong. The sound was too heavy. Too many horses. This wasn't one man coming for a quiet business deal. This was something else entirely. Zara looked up at him, her trust a knife in his gut. "He's not coming today," she said again, a little louder this time, as if she could will it to be true. The wagon sounds grew closer, a grim drumbeat counting down the final seconds of his life as he knew it. Buttercup flattened his ears and brayed, a sound of pure defiance. Robert checked his watch. Right on time for Alex Vickers. But this didn't sound like Alex Vickers. This sounded like Henderson had grown tired of waiting. This sounded like he'd sent his collectors. 3 riders appeared over the rise, their silhouettes dark against the morning sun. None of them was the man Robert had met in town, the man who called himself Alex Vickers. The man in front was Marcus Reed, Henderson's top enforcer, a man who collected debts with his fists and his gun, a man known for breaking more than just promises. The 2 men with him were cut from the same cloth, rifles resting easy in their hands. The deal was off. Henderson had sent the wolves. Marcus swung down from his horse, his boots thudding onto the dry earth. His eyes, cold as a winter river, swept over the ramshackle property, lingering for a moment on the rotting fence before finally landing on Robert and the small girl hiding behind his legs. "Robert Caldwell." Marcus's voice was a gravelly boom that seemed to suck the air out of the yard. "Mr. Henderson sent us to settle your account." Robert's throat was dust. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "Where's Alex Vickers? We had an arrangement." A harsh, ugly laugh burst from Marcus's lips. "Alex Vickers?" he sneered, stepping closer to the fence. "There ain't no Alex Vickers, you damn fool." The world tilted under Robert's feet. The name, the story, the ranch. It was all a fabrication. Henderson made him up. Marcus continued, enjoying the look of devastation on Robert's face. Wanted to see if you'd really do it. Wanted to know if you were the kind of man who'd sell his own kid to save his skin. It was a test, a sick, cruel game to measure the depth of his desperation, and he had failed. Zara clutched his leg tighter, her little fingers digging into the worn fabric of his trousers. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the menace coiling in the air. "So what now?" Robert finally managed to ask, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Now," Marcus said, his gaze dropping to Zara. "Henderson collects what he's owed. The original 200 plus 50 for the late fee." He gestured with his chin toward the girl. "Lucky for you, his offer still stands. He'll take the girl as payment in full. Turns out she's worth more than cash to some of his clients." Buttercup let out a loud, angry snort and pressed his body firmly against the gate latch. His big head turned to face the men. He was a living barricade. "Move your animal," Marcus commanded, his patience wearing thin. "We're here on business." Robert's mind was a whirlwind of panic and shame. The whole thing had been a lie, a cruel manipulation to see if his soul was for sale. This wasn't about a debt anymore. This was about something dark and unspeakable. "I'm not giving you the girl," Robert said, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. Marcus's hand drifted down, coming to rest on the worn leather handle of his pistol. "That's a real shame," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "because Mr. Henderson is done waiting." He shrugged, a casual gesture that was terrifying in its indifference. "If you won't pay with cash, and you won't pay with the girl, well, this little patch of dirt is worth something, I suppose. After we get rid of you, of course." The other two men began to spread out, moving to flank him. It was a classic pincer move, designed to cut off any escape. Zara looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She was starting to understand. Buttercup brayed again, a wild, desperate sound, and reared up slightly, his hooves pawing at the air. That's when Robert knew. Henderson hadn't just wanted to collect a debt. He'd wanted to break him, to own him, to prove that every man had a price. And in that moment, something inside Robert Caldwell, something he thought had died with his wife, roared back to life. He scooped Zara into his arms, spun around, and ran. He ran for the back of the cabin, his boots pounding the ground as angry shouts erupted behind him. The choice had been made. There was no deal. There was only a fight. "Where do you think you're going, Caldwell?" Marcus's voice chased him across the yard. "You can't outrun your debts." He could hear them at the gate, cursing and kicking at the stubborn donkey who was still holding his ground. The sound of wood splintering told him they wouldn't be held back for long. He set Zara down behind the woodshed, his back to the chaos, and knelt so he was looking her right in the eye. Her face was chalky white, but she wasn't crying. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice urgent. "Run to the creek, hide in the big hollow log, the one where we saw the rabbits. You remember?" She nodded, her small chin trembling. "Don't you come out, not for anything, not until you hear me call your name 3 times. And if you don't hear me by sunset." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Take this to Mrs. Haley at the general store. She'll know what to do." A loud crack echoed from the front yard. They were through the fence. He grabbed the old hunting rifle that leaned against the shed. He checked the chamber. 3 bullets. It wasn't a war, but it was a statement. "Go," he urged her. "Now, stay low to the ground." She paused for a heartbeat, her small form frozen. Then she threw her arms around his neck, a desperate, clinging hug. "Are they bad men, Robert?" she whispered into his shirt. The simple question shattered what was left of his heart. After everything, after all his failures, she still had to ask. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "They're bad men, but they won't get you, I promise." She slipped away into the tall grass, silent as a fawn. He watched until she was gone. Then he took a deep breath, turned, and walked back toward the front of the cabin to face the men who had come to take his world apart. Marcus Reed was in the yard now. The 2 goons were fanning out, and near the broken gate, Buttercup was lying on his side, his breath coming in ragged pants. They hadn't just gotten past him. They'd hurt him. They'd kicked his loyal old friend aside like a piece of trash. A white-hot rage, pure and clean, burned away all of Robert's fear. That donkey had been with him through failed crops, brutal winters, and the long, silent nights after Martha passed. Seeing him hurt was the last straw. Robert raised his rifle, not aiming, just holding it. A clear message. "Change of plans," he said, his voice dangerously level. Marcus just smirked, his hand still resting on his pistol. "The only thing that's changed is my level of patience. Where's the girl?" One of the other men, the one who looked like the real Alex Vickers from town, spoke up, his voice nervous. "Robert, let's be reasonable. You owe Mr. Henderson $200. I already gave you the $50 deposit. Just give us the girl, and we can all walk away from this." Robert stared at him, confused. "What deposit? I never took any money from you." The man's face went from nervous to confused, then to dawning horror as he looked at Marcus. "Henderson? Henderson told me he'd already given you the deposit, said you were getting cold feet and he wanted me to come along to smooth things over." The trap was more complex than he'd imagined. Henderson had been playing everyone. There was no deposit. There was no real deal for this Vickers fellow either. He was just another pawn, a disposable piece in Henderson's sick game. The only thing that was real was Henderson's desire to get his hands on Zara. "Why?" Robert demanded, the rifle feeling heavier in his hands. "Why her?" Marcus Reed's smile was the ugliest thing Robert had ever seen. "Let's just say Mr. Henderson has particular tastes, and he has clients who pay a premium for specific arrangements. Little girls like that one are a valuable commodity." The words were a punch to the gut. It wasn't about work. It wasn't even about paying off a debt. It was human trafficking. He had almost sold Zara into a nightmare worse than he could have ever imagined. "You sick bastard," Robert breathed, the rifle coming up to his shoulder. Now," Marcus said, and his gun was out of its holster in a blur of motion. "No need for insults. It's just business." The third man started circling to Robert's left, trying to get a clear shot. Robert swung the barrel of the rifle toward him, and in that split second, Marcus took 2 quick steps closer. "Here's how this ends," Marcus said, his voice low and confident. "You call the girl out. We put her in the wagon. You take the money you're owed, and you thank us for not putting a bullet between your eyes." Buttercup groaned on the ground, trying to lift his head. The old donkey wasn't done fighting yet. "And if I refuse?" Robert asked, stalling for time, his mind racing. Marcus's grin was pure evil. "Then we'll enjoy finding her ourselves, and you won't be around to see what happens after that." Just then, a twig snapped in the woods behind him, a small sound, but loud as a cannon shot in the tense silence. Robert's blood ran cold. It wasn't Zara. The sound was too heavy, too clumsy. It was someone else. The trap was closing. Marcus's evil grin widened. "Expecting company, Caldwell? We brought a few extra hands, just in case you prove to be as stubborn as your ass." 2 more men stepped out from the trees behind the cabin, rifles held at the ready. 5 of them. 5 guns against his 1 rifle with 3 bullets. The odds weren't just bad, they were impossible. He was a dead man. But then the impossible happened. Buttercup, the injured old donkey, struggled to his feet. He limped toward Marcus Reed, his head low, favoring his bruised leg. He looked defeated, broken. Marcus watched him, a look of contempt on his face. "Even your animal knows when to give up," he sneered, and that's when Buttercup attacked. With a speed that defied his age and injuries, he lunged forward. His powerful jaws clamped down on Marcus Reed's gun hand. The man screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony and shock. The pistol clattered to the dirt. The other men were frozen for a split second, stunned by the donkey's sudden savagery. That was all the time Robert needed. He dove, not for cover, but for the dropped gun. "Get it off me! Get this damn thing off me!" Marcus shrieked, slamming his free fist against Buttercup's head, but the donkey held on with the tenacity of a bulldog. One of the flanking men finally reacted, raising his rifle to shoot the animal. Robert was faster. He had Marcus's pistol now. He fired. The shot cracked through the air, and the man spun around, clutching a bloody shoulder, his rifle falling from his grasp. Buttercup let go, his job done, and staggered back. Marcus cradled his mangled hand, blood pouring between his fingers. His face was a mask of pure hatred. "You're dead, Caldwell. Henderson will see you buried for this." Robert now had his rifle and a pistol. There were still four of them, but the fight had changed. "Here's my final offer," Robert said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Get on your horses, ride out, and tell Henderson his deal is off. Permanently." Marcus just laughed, a pained, bitter sound. "And how are you going to pay your debt? You're a broke farmer with nothing." That's when a new sound reached them. The thunder of hoofbeats. More riders, coming fast from the direction of town. For a terrifying second, Robert thought Henderson had sent even more men. But then he recognized the lead horse. It was Sheriff Morgan. The law had arrived. Sheriff Morgan and three deputies galloped into the yard, their badges flashing in the sun. Robert had never been so relieved to see them, but a cold dread still gripped him. In a town like this, a man like Henderson often had the law in his pocket. "What in God's name is going on here?" the sheriff demanded, swinging down from his horse. His sharp eyes took in the entire scene in a single glance. Marcus bleeding, the man with the wounded shoulder, and Robert standing his ground with two guns. Marcus was the first to find his voice. "Sheriff, thank God. This man is crazy. He attacked us while we were trying to conduct a legal business transaction for Mr. Henderson." "That's a lie," Robert shot back, his voice steady. "He drew on me first. Ask him what bit his hand. It was my donkey, and donkeys only bite when they feel threatened." Sheriff Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Your donkey bit him?" "He was protecting his home," Robert said. "These men came here armed to the teeth, talking about taking a little girl as payment for a debt. That's not debt collection, Sheriff. That's kidnapping." One of the deputies leaned over and whispered something in the sheriff's ear. Morgan's face hardened. He strode over to Marcus and grabbed his injured hand, ignoring the man's yelp of pain. He examined the deep puncture wounds. "Those are animal bites, all right," he confirmed. He looked Marcus dead in the eye. "And I've been hearing whispers about Henderson's special arrangements for months. Why don't you tell me why you need 5 armed men to collect a debt from one farmer? And why you're so interested in his little girl?" Marcus turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. We were just here for the money." "Then where is she?" the sheriff pressed. "If you weren't here for the girl, why did you even mention her?" A spark of hope ignited in Robert's chest. The sheriff wasn't bought. He was investigating. "She's safe," Robert said. "I hid her when I saw them coming." "Smart man," the sheriff said with a nod. He turned his cold gaze back to Marcus. "You and your boys are going to get on your horses, and you are going to ride out of my county. If I ever see your faces on this property again, I'll have you all arrested for trespassing, assault, and attempted kidnapping. Am I clear?" Marcus clutched his bleeding hand, his eyes burning with impotent rage. "Henderson won't let this go. He has his rights." "Henderson has the right to file a claim in a civil court," the sheriff retorted. "He does not have the right to send a private army to abduct children. Now get out of my sight." As the defeated men rode away, Marcus shot one last look over his shoulder. "This isn't over, Caldwell. Henderson always collects." The threat hung in the air long after they were gone. The sheriff turned to Robert. "Is that debt real?" Robert nodded wearily. $200. But I never agreed to his terms about Zara. That was all him." "Well, you bought yourself some time," the sheriff said, his expression serious. "But he's right about one thing. A man like Henderson doesn't give up. He'll find another way. You need to settle that debt, or next time I might not show up in time." Robert looked over at Buttercup, who was now standing guard by the broken gate, battered but unbowed. The old donkey had bought them a miracle. But miracles don't pay debts. After the lawmen left, Robert walked down to the creek. He found Zara curled up inside the hollow log, her doll held tight against her chest. She wasn't crying. She was just waiting. "Are the bad men gone?" she asked, her voice small. "For now," he said, scooping her into a hug that felt like coming home. They sat on the porch steps as the sun began to set. Buttercup grazed peacefully nearby, his limp already starting to fade. "Zara," Robert started, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Those men, they came because of me. I owe a bad man a lot of money. Money I don't have. And he wanted me to give you to him to make it right. He couldn't look at her. I almost did it, Zara. I was so scared, so lost. I almost did it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then her small hand found his. But you didn't, she said, her voice clear and simple. You fought for me. Her forgiveness was a heavier blow than any punch Marcus Reed could have thrown. It was a gift he didn't deserve. The problem is, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I still owe the money, and that man will keep coming back for us. Just then, a single rider appeared on the road. It was Sheriff Morgan coming back alone. His face was grim. Caldwell, he said, dismounting, I need to talk to you. I spoke with my deputies. This thing with Henderson, it's bigger than we thought. He's been doing this all over the county, using debts as leverage to get his hands on things, people. Robert stood up, a new, terrible understanding dawning on him. What kind of things? The kind that makes children vanish from their homes, the sheriff said, his voice low and hard. We've been building a case against him for a year, but we've never had a witness willing to testify. Everyone is too afraid. He looked Robert straight in the eye. Until now, if you're willing to stand up in a courtroom and tell a judge exactly what Henderson proposed, exactly what his men did here today, it could be enough. It could be enough to put him away for good. The sheriff paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But I won't lie to you. Testifying against a man like Henderson is dangerous. He has a long reach. Robert looked down at the little girl holding his hand. He looked at the loyal donkey standing watch at the gate. He thought of his promise to Martha. For months he had been a coward, running from his problems, making deals with devils. He was done running. Sheriff, he asked, a strange calm settling over him. If Henderson goes to prison, what happens to my debt? A small smile touched the corner of the sheriff's mouth. Funny thing about that, turns out Henderson has been charging illegal, predatory interest rates. Any contract he makes is built on a foundation of crime. A judge is likely to rule that the entire debt is null and void. For the first time in a very long time, Robert Caldwell felt a flicker of hope. He looked at the lawman, his decision made. Sheriff, he said, his voice firm, when do you need me? 3 weeks later, Robert stood on the steps of the county courthouse and watched as Henderson, a man who had seemed like a king, was led away in chains. The trial was a whirlwind. Once Robert testified, 4 other families found the courage to come forward. The stories they told were horrifying. The judge threw the book at him. 25 years for racketeering, conspiracy, and human trafficking. Marcus Reed got 10. The rest of Henderson's thugs turned on him for lighter sentences. The judge was clear about the debt. Any contract secured through criminal coercion and illegal terms is invalid. Mr. Caldwell, you are a free man. You owe nothing. The words felt like a dream. He was free, truly free. Sheriff Morgan clapped him on the shoulder. How does it feel? Like I can finally breathe, Robert said. You did a brave thing, son. A very brave thing. Robert looked across the town square. Zara was waiting for him in the wagon, holding Buttercup's lead rope. The old donkey stood tall, his wounds healed, looking for all the world like a war hero. I almost gave up on everything, Robert confessed quietly to the sheriff. If it wasn't for that stubborn donkey. But you didn't give up, the sheriff said. When it mattered most, you chose to fight. That's the only part of the story that anyone will remember. As they walked to the wagon, people from town, people who used to avoid his gaze, nodded to him with respect. Mrs. Haley from the general store rushed over, pressing a heavy cloth bag into his hands. The church took up a collection, she said, to help you fix your fence. It wasn't charity, it was community. It was a helping hand from neighbors who finally saw him not as a failure, but as a man who had stood up to a monster. Zara ran to him, her face alight. Did the bad man go away forever? Forever and a day, Robert said, lifting her into the wagon. As they rode home with Buttercup trotting alongside, Robert knew that everything had changed. Desperation had almost turned him into a villain. But in the end, love for a little girl and the stubborn loyalty of an old donkey had turned him into a hero. The road ahead wasn't paved with gold, but it was his road. and for the first time, he felt worthy of walking it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring more tales of the Old West to life. And if you have a story you think we should tell, let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.